Eugene Budget Committee meeting. It is a privilege to be here. I'm thankful to all of you for being here with us. And just as always, I ask all of us at the table to remember through all of our work through this whole process that not everyone in our community shares the privilege we have of being able to participate in these proceedings. And in a great many cases, the decisions that we make here will have the most impact on those members of our community that are least able to join us. So just please allow that to be a guiding light for us. And thank you again for joining us for the City Manager's presentation of the 2025 to 2027 proposed biennial budget. This is an in-person meeting, and anyone wishing to access the meeting remotely can do so by watching the live stream on our Budget Committee webcast's website or by tuning into the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. Tonight's meeting will not include a public comment period. Public comment will be received in person during the May 14th and May 21st Budget Committee meetings, and a hybrid testimony will be received during the May 28th public hearing. As a reminder, meeting rules of conduct apply to all attendees, both in chambers and in the lobby, and include no flags, signs, loud or disruptive language, noise, or conduct that obstructs the business of the Budget Committee. Please keep the room quiet and respectful for all speakers. You are welcome to wave your hands in silent support. Additionally, we encourage those that are ill or who have had close contact with others that are ill to join our meetings remotely rather than in person. We also have masks available in the lobby if you need one. In case of a medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, AED, is located on the counter behind the staff at the west side of the room. Emergency exits are through the double doors located at the back of the room and the double doors near the front of the room. The doors to the patio can also be used as needed. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to City Manager Mederi for her presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I meant thank you, Budget Committee members. Thank you, Chair. I was hoping you would never turn it over to me and you would just keep going. It was great. It's good to be here tonight. It's good to be here in person. I'll reference that at least once tonight. I want to share before I jump in that we're also joined tonight by the city's executive team. I think everybody is here in person. Our department budget managers, which are folks that have been doing a lot of hard work for us over the last few months, and our finance team. We're scattered all around, but we're all here to support you through this process tonight and as we go forward. Tonight's presentation is going to be a combination of me and our Chief Financial Officer, Twyla Miller. I'm going to start it off with a few context slides, maybe a little storytelling, and then Twyla will take over most of the finance pieces, and it'll turn back to me to walk through the reductions and some of those impacts. So that's sort of how it's going to play out. A little bit about our context and timeline. So I get a lot of questions still from employees. I'm going to show this exact same slide tomorrow at an all-city meeting, and from the public not understanding how we got to where we are. So regardless of how we got here in terms of a revenue standpoint, I will walk through a little bit. When we adopted the 2023 through 2025 budget, we had about an $8 million gap. I wasn't going to go into the decimal points too much here, but we had about an $8 million gap that was on top of what we had solved with another about $25 million in the biennium in reductions. That $8 million gap was anticipated to either be filled with more cuts or with revenue, and the direction that I received was to work on revenue. So we did that, gathered some revenue advisors, came up with some solutions. These are not going to be totally in chronological order, but essentially solved that $8 million gap. So between that and when you received your proposed budget, Council had some conversations about things they'd like me to consider building into an ongoing budget. So this was not specific policy direction, but it was hey, we have some hopes about what we want to see ongoing, and I'm going to refer to that a little bit later. But with those additions, we actually had sort of a new gap of $3.5 million if we were to put all of that in. As most of us know, as that revenue became uncertain, that was already built in, our gap grew to 11.5. So that's what we're talking about tonight. It's the amended budget. It's how we got to 11.5. Just a note that we released that second budget on Friday, so that the timeline between then and now is pretty tight. So if my numbers aren't exactly specific, that could be why. So our timeline for our work together for you is really starting tonight, and then you have 3 more additional meetings to include a public hearing, and then you will recommend a budget to go to a public hearing and action by the City Council. As you likely know, on Monday night, this past Monday, Council asked for a work session. In fact, they asked for a couple to talk about a potential alternate revenue solution. And I laid out a timeline that would show potentially, and this is not a decision by any stretch, we will be back on the 14th, and that we may be back again on the 21st, and we could potentially be taking action on something potentially the same night you're having a public hearing and action on the budget. That's just the timeline we laid out. It's ambitious. All right, I've been doing a little bit of reflection on the last 5 years. So just a couple of things that I want to point out with these pictures going across here. I know you've seen some of them before. The first one you actually haven't seen. It's the first time I presented an amended budget. So this was in 2020, and I put my laptop on a stack of books. We didn't have webcams yet. Was sitting alone in the space we rented from Lane County. There was nobody in the building. It was very odd, and I was meeting a lot of you for the first time on that night. We talked a lot about the adventure ahead of us, and we talked about just the challenges and the summit that we would have to climb. All of that anticipating there was an end. We would solve these problems. We talked about building base camp, and for me that meant we have the right team in place, we have the resources we need, and while we're working to kind of solve this problem, we have everything we need to be prepared. And then we kind of went on a road trip because it wasn't totally solved. And I will say I did try to make this fun along the way, to include even making a slide of a playlist with my personal favorite line items you know by heart. So we did try to make it fun, and I will just say it hasn't always been fun. In particular this year, not fun. And this Post-it note actually lived on my laptop for many years. Get back up and begin again. And that could be a theme for tonight as well. So as I look around the state and I look at all of the challenges and we start to look at the information that Twyla gives us, I think we are on a longer journey. So I don't have the same sense that we're just going to finish, because there are challenges related to our property tax system, related to economic uncertainty. So we'll just get back up and begin again. This is the executive team that developed the 2023 through 2025 budget, and I just included it because there was a lot of work that went into that, and we spent a lot of time talking about the values that we held as we were building that budget coming forward. The team has changed. We've gotten a little bit bigger, just not in additional employees, but just expanding who's influencing the decisions. But our values have pretty much stayed very aligned with that. This team has over 200 years of combined experience, and that was just doing rough math. That's probably closer to 300 years. We've worked in a lot of different sectors. We have experience in cities, counties, hospital systems, university system, private sector, including construction, legal, technology. It's a very talented and creative team, and most importantly, a very caring team. I've shared this slide before when I talked about leadership values. I'm very much a values-based leader. I think it's important to understand that, especially when you're making decisions like what's driving that. Mine have not wavered very much at all over the years. It's authenticity, making a difference, and stewardship, which is why I've been able to find such satisfaction here working for the public. And I will just say that's been amazing. I did also share a quote a couple of years ago. I'm going to share again because it popped up in some notes from Brene Brown, which is, here we are in this moment. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. And I am anticipating that this will not be our most comfortable budget process. With that, I'll turn it over to Twyla.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. So I have quite a few slides I'll be walking you through today. We'll walk through a range of financial information, and we'll be talking about changes in some of our major forecast drivers and variables. The comparison point for changes will be from the 2023-2025 adopted budget forecast to the 2025-2027 amended budget forecast. So the chart you see here shows our operating surplus and deficit for the 2023-2025 adopted budget almost 2 years ago, which is shown by the blue line on the chart. As Sarah mentioned, at that time, we implemented $25 million in budget strategies in the 2023-2025 biennium and included a revenue placeholder of almost $8 million in the second year of the biennium, as council continued to have revenue conversations. The green line on the chart shows that without additional revenue or further reductions, we would be in a deficit position throughout the forecast period. Through many supplemental budget actions this biennium, we have enacted strategies, including additional reductions in revenues, including new revenue achieved from council making parks and open space expenditures stormwater eligible. These additional actions have carried us through the biennium in a stable financial position. While new revenue strategies were considered to address the ongoing gap in the 2025-2027 biennium. So the 2025-2027 amended proposed budget across all city funds is $1.6 billion. As a reminder, we're now in a biennial budget cycle, so the dollar amounts shown here represent 2 years of budget. The largest slice of the pie is the non-departmental category, which consists of balance available, reserves, transfers, and debt service. The remainder of the budget is made up of capital projects and operating expenses broken out between the 6 city operating departments. When internal expenditures and transfer are omitted, our net budget is $1.3 billion. The net budget subtracts out internal expenditures and transfers that are budgeted twice, once in the paying fund and once in the receiving fund. So we have 35 reporting funds here at the city, which are organized by fund type as shown on the slide. The funds outside of the general fund are used to account for revenue sources that are legally restricted for specific purposes and can't be used to fund financial gaps or services outside of their prescribed use. For example, we can't use airport funds, which are restricted by the FAA, or road fund revenue from gas taxes, which are restricted by the state, for other uses or to provide general services. The general fund has 3 subfunds. The main subfund of the general fund represents the true discretionary funds of the city and has historically been the foundation for many of our essential services. So fire, police, library, planning, municipal court facilities, and central business functions are all funded out of our general fund. The cultural services subfund accounts for the operations of the Halt Center, community events, and the Cuthbert Amphitheater. The equipment replacement fund accounts for resources associated with future replacement of general fund equipment other than vehicles. So when I'm speaking of the general fund tonight, I'm speaking about the main subfund of the general fund, which is truly our discretionary dollars. So the 2025-2027 amended proposed budget for the general fund is $446.5 million. The non-departmental category primarily consists of ending fund balance, reserves, and transfers to other funds. The remainder of the budget is made up of operating expenses broken out between our 6 city departments, with the largest share going to police, followed by fire and EMS, with Public Works having the smallest slice of the pie. And this table shows the ratio of each department's operating budget in the general fund versus other funds. Police has the largest ratio of their operating budget in the general fund, while Public Works has the smallest. Overall, 36% of citywide operating budget is in the general fund, and the other 64% is spread across our other funds. So the general fund forecast is a tool that projects how much the city will spend and receive over the next 6 years. This assists policymakers in developing strategies to meet future challenges. Finance staff are regularly monitoring and tracking the many variables for the forecast, which are shown at a high level here. The city has been using a 6-year forecast system for many, many years to help guide us through difficult financial times, including the Great Recession. While the data is used in the forecast is updated regularly. The sources and methodologies have remained relatively consistent over time. So in addition to the city's financial data, the forecast utilizes many sources to inform our revenue and expense projections. The most significant forecast data sources are shown here on this slide. City of Eugene certified population data comes from Portland State University, and future population projections are based on state-provided growth estimates. Lane County Assessment and Taxation provides much of the data used to estimate our property tax revenue, and we also analyze the city's building permit data to project taxable construction activity. eWeb provides us with an updated contribution in lieu of tax, or SILT forecast 2 times per year. The forecast from eWeb includes known price changes and estimated consumption patterns, which are largely driven by weather. The League of Oregon Cities publishes an annual report each February that informs our projections on state revenue sharing, which includes state tax revenue from the sale of alcohol, cigarettes, and marijuana. The Oregon Office of Economic Analysis releases projected CPI data on a quarterly basis, and this is used as a basis for our general inflation numbers in our forecast. Represented compensation is determined by union contract, and COLAs beyond the contractual end date are then tied to the general inflation rate in our forecast. And non-rep compensation is determined by the executive team, and COLAs are tied to the general inflation rate. Employer-specific PERS rates, which are updated every other year, are recommended by the actuary and approved by the PERS board. The actuary also publishes advisory rates in the years in between rate setting, and PERS provides a rate projection tool to help employers estimate future rates, which we use regularly. Health and risk rates are recommended by the Employee Resource Center and include actuarial projections. And then finally, our investment portfolio earnings rate is determined by our Investment Advisory Board and is used to estimate interest earnings on our cash balances at the city. So we've seen this graphic before, and this incorporates our current forecast, including the amended proposed budget reductions and investments that the city manager will review a bit later tonight. There are many variables impacting the forecast that can trend upward or downward, and the current forecast includes updates to major drivers that have changed since last biennium. I'll highlight a few of the areas here and go into much more detail on our major drivers in the next few slides. So property taxes are our largest revenue source in the general fund. Our property tax projections are based on current data and updated information from the Lane County Tax Assessor. Although property tax revenue is going up from year to year, the current forecast is lower than the prior forecast due to slower growth in taxable assessed value than previously projected. Web SILT, or contribution in lieu of taxes, is the second largest revenue source in the general fund. Our forecast does align with eWeb's current projections, which incorporates electric price increases over the next few years. This will result in higher projected SILT revenue in the future compared to our previous forecast estimates. Service charges represent the third largest revenue source in the general fund and include revenue from various sources such as police and fire service charges, recreation programming, and facility rentals, among other things. Projected revenue from service charges remains largely unchanged from our prior forecast. And then there's state shared revenues. Our current state shared revenue forecast is lower compared to the previous forecast due to the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, or OLCC, overestimating growth in liquor sales and underestimating the cost of their new warehouse. The cost of their new warehouse has more than doubled from their original estimate, and any funds used to pay for it reduces shared revenue for cities. City staff recently provided testimony to the state legislature during an informational hearing on this topic so that they would understand the impact on cities in Oregon. Now we'll talk briefly about the expense side, where expenses have continued to grow faster than projections and outpace our growth in revenue. Inflation has yet to return to pre-pandemic levels, putting ongoing upward pressure on wages. And another factor contributing to increased personnel expenses includes rising retirement costs as PERS, as our rates continue to increase significantly. One positive item to note is that health care costs in the upcoming biennium are less than previously expected due to positive claims experience and strategic use of balance available as stabilization has occurred post-pandemic. So as a reminder, property taxes, e-web silt, and service charges are our top three revenue sources in our general fund. These three types account for approximately 85% of all general fund revenues, with property taxes representing the largest share by far at 71%. This slide shows the actual growth rate over the past 5 years. As you can see, our average annual revenue growth is 2.7% over this time period. This chart is looking at changes in our taxable assessed value over time. This metric is important because the general fund's permanent tax rate has been fixed at the same level since 1997. Therefore, growth in our general fund property tax revenue comes from growth in taxable assessed value, which is limited to 3% per year, plus new taxable construction. The blue line in the chart is divided into three sections, starting with before the Great Recession on the left, during the recession in the middle, and post-recession on the right. The most recent actual growth rate came in at 3.8% in FY25. However, the current growth rate would have been just 3.4% without the agency board-approved frozen base increase. This action shifted taxable assessed value from the Riverfront Urban Renewal District to the overlapping tax districts. On the far right-hand side of the chart, the green dashed line shows the forecasted annual growth in taxable assessed value over the next 6 years. There's a projected increase of 4% next year due to the expiration of a 10-year MUPD for the 13th and Olive apartments. Beyond that, the annual average growth rate is projected to be 3.6% based on anticipated construction activity. One contributing factor towards lower assessed value growth is the declining change property ratio over the last decade. Introduced by Measure 5, the change property ratio is a county-wide average of assessed value to real market value for properties within the same classification. This chart shows the change property ratio trends in Lane County for the most common property types, including residential, commercial industrial, and multifamily housing. These ratios are generally trending downward because real market values have been growing faster than assessed values have. The changed property ratio is important because it's used to determine the assessed value of new construction in the first year of a property coming on the tax rolls. After that, assessed value growth is limited to 3% per year. Another key point is that lower changed property ratios mean that it now takes more construction value to generate the same amount of revenue. So this box shows how much new construction value it took in fiscal year 14 to generate $1 million of general fund property tax revenue in Eugene. And fast forwarding to today, it takes significantly more new construction to generate the same $1 million in revenue. And then here are a couple of examples in Eugene that illustrate the limitations caused by the change property ratio. These are both new student housing apartment complexes that joined our tax roll in FY14. They have similar real market values, tax roll in FY24. They have similar real market values near 90 million, but the initial assessed values are about 36 million after applying the change property ratio of 0.4%, which means our local taxing districts receive property tax revenue based on 40% of the units in the building, but we will provide service to all of the units. The change property ratio is intended to be an equitable way to add new properties to the tax rolls compared to existing properties. However, the result is that new growth doesn't pay for government services that the residents who are moving in need, exacerbating our ability to maintain our service levels in the community. Next, we'll look at the property tax collection rate. This is another key driver. The city does not receive 100% of taxes levied for two reasons. First, the majority of the taxpayers take advantage of the early payment discount of up to 3%. And second, not everyone pays their taxes on time, and so taxes owed become past due. The forecasted collection rate is 95.6%, based on the actual average we've experienced over the last 5 years. So when Eugene taxpayers pay their property tax bill, that revenue provides funding for more than just the city of Eugene. Here's the current breakdown of each property tax dollar paid by the majority of Eugene taxpayers. For every tax dollar paid by a Eugene taxpayer, 41 cents comes to the city. If we break down the 41-cent share, the majority supports our general fund, while the remainder provides funding for voter-approved bonds and local option levies. So this table shows the City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency taxes for the typical Eugene home. This is defined as the median assessed value of a single-family home, which is currently about $254,000. The tax bill for the City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency taxes for a typical Eugene home is a little over $2,100, or 42% of the total tax bill for a typical home in Eugene. So Oregon law allows many types of taxable property exemptions, and this is a summarized list for Eugene. Over $4.6 billion of assessed value is currently exempt from property taxes, which is almost 20% of assessed value citywide. Some of these exemptions are locally controlled, and others are, and those are indicated by the stars on this chart. However, the majority of exemptions are mandated by state statute. In a theoretical world, if all of the property was taxable, it would generate nearly $31 million of permanent tax rate revenue per year for the general fund. The first row of this table includes the University of Oregon, which is Eugene's largest individual exempt entity. Their expansive campus and prominent sporting venues cover more than 400 acres. The University of Oregon alone accounts for $1.6 billion of exempt assessed value, which, if taxable, would generate $10.6 million per year for Eugene's general fund. And then this chart looks at our top 10 taxpayers in the current year compared to last year. Some significant year-over-year changes include Shepherd Investment Group, a real estate investment company, which moved us up to second place after acquiring additional existing rental property. Valley River Center dropped to the third place on the list after appealing their value. And it's also worth noting that utilities and telecommunication companies are centrally assessed by the state of Oregon, and they don't follow typical growth patterns. Central assessment can result in volatile changes year over year, each cycle. So the overall assessed value for this group of top 10 taxpayers increased by 0.4% from the prior year. So next, we'll look at general fund expenses. The average annual growth rate across all expenses in the general fund over these 5 years was 3%, which reflects a lot of effort to cut costs and increase efficiencies. Even with the high degree of fiscal stewardship, the growth in expenses exceeded the average revenue growth of just 2.7% over the same time period. The average annual expense growth rate of 3% excludes expenditures of one-time funding such as ARPA, state homelessness response funds, and opioid settlement funds, in order to provide an apples-to-apples comparison of revenues and expenses. However, these one-time dollars were allocated to high-priority needs in our community that did not have other funding sources, so to include the expenses provides a better picture of ongoing service level needs in our community. If we include expenditures from these one-time funds, the average annual expense growth rate over these 5 years increases to 4.4%. So the state economist issues inflation forecasts 4 times per year. This chart shows the most recent forecast from March 2025, as shown in the blue line on the right side, compared to our previous forecast from last December. Actual inflation peaked at 7.2% in FY22, dropped to 6.3% in FY23, and then down to 3.3% in FY24. While the pace of inflation has slowed considerably over the past 2 years, lingering price pressures remain are proving persistent as the economy continues to face labor and other capacity constraints. Continued uncertainty about future inflation impacts in relation to events happening at the federal level persist, and we're watching those events very closely. In the general fund forecast, cost of living adjustment assumptions are tied to the CPI in years beyond the current contract for bargaining units, so even small changes in inflation can have a big impact on the forecast. If rates rise at 1% annually over the rates shown here, our general fund costs would increase by $25 million over the 6-year forecast period. The next economic forecast will be released by the state on May 14th, and we'll be watching closely to see what the most current forecast holds. PERS is the Public Employees Retirement System. It's a pension plan for public employers. The Oregon Legislature creates the PERS pension plan, the Oregon Investment Council invests the assets, and the PERS board sets the rates that employers must pay to cover system costs. The city does not determine the benefits or the cost of PERS, and due to previous lawsuits and court rulings, the ability to affect systems costs have been limited overall. PERS rates for employers are driven by projected liabilities of retirees, inactive members, and current PERS members. The legislature has made changes over the years to amend benefit programs to more sustainable levels, and although 69% of the cost is due to members who are already retired or who are no longer working for a PERS employer, as shown on the chart at the left. These retirees have earned benefits, and the courts have said that the benefits cannot be reduced retroactively. City employees hired after 2003 fall within our OPSERT program, whose active members comprise just 14% of PERS system actuarial liabilities. The chart on the right-hand side shows that PERS funding mostly comes from investment earnings as contributed amounts are invested and projected to increase in value over time. Employer and employee contributions make up just 20% of the system's assets and funding. Given that investment earnings make up such a large percentage of share of the PERS funding, the investment rate of return can have a large impact on the system. A key driver for significant PERS rate increases in the 25-27 biennium is that investment returns in 22 and 2023 were well below the assumed rate of 6.9% in each year. So PERS employer contribution rates are updated every other year, and these updates have caused consecutive steep rate increases for the city. This table shows the last 5 updates, and the far right-hand column shows the PERS board approved rates for the 2025-2027 biennium. The black numbers on the table show the employer contribution rates as a percentage of payroll, while the red numbers reflect the increase from the prior rate. These red figures reflect the cost increases for the city every time PERS rates increase. This table shows our annual general fund PERS costs over several fiscal years. In fiscal year 26, PERS costs in the general fund are budgeted to increase by $4.8 million, or 21% over fiscal year 25. This is a good example of an expense that increases much faster than revenues. It's difficult to absorb other cost increases when a single line item like PERS consumes the entirety of the general fund property tax revenue increase in the first year of the 2025-2027 biennium. So next we'll talk a little bit about the employer incentive fund. The city does not determine the benefits or the cost of the PERS system, and usually we cannot take any actions that impact our rates. However, in 2019, the Oregon Legislature passed Senate Bill 1049, which allocated matching funds for the employer incentive fund. The city used this opportunity to make a lump sum contribution and leverage a 25% matching funds from the state to reduce future payroll rates. The city made a lump sum contribution of $5 million in July of 2020 and received state match of $1.25 million. This created a side account of $6.25 million that will be amortized over 20 years, which provides the city with a rate reduction of 0.32% of payroll during the 2025-2027 biennium. Over the full 20-year amortization period, the city's PERS costs will be reduced by an estimated $11.4 million because of this investment. Ongoing funding for the Employer Incentive Fund will be provided by proceeds from Oregon Lottery sports betting. The EIF program is opening a new application cycle for 2025 in 2 phases. Phase 1 opened this April 1st, and Phase 2 will open on July 1st. The city qualifies for Phase 1, which is reserved for employers with an unfunded actuarial liability, or UAL, greater than 200% of payroll. Given our current budget constraints, the city does not have the financial capacity at this time to participate in another round of the EIF, but will continuously monitor the situation. This program is scheduled to remain active until 2042, and PERS will periodically open new application cycles as sports betting revenue allows. And then finally, when we think about PERS costs, after many years of trying to rein in and reduce PERS costs, the Oregon legislature has more recently gone the other way, taking actions that will increase future PERS costs for the city and other public employers around the state. During the 2024 regular session, the legislature passed House Bill 4045, which contains 2 changes that will increase the city's PERS costs. HB 4045 lowered the normal retirement age for police officers and firefighters in the OPSERV category, causing higher employer contribution rates starting in the 2025-2027 biennium. HB 4045 also established a new hazardous position classification, which includes 911 telecommunicators, with higher benefits and earlier retirement eligibility than OPSERV general service. This provision will lead to higher contribution rates starting in 2031-2033 biennium. Additionally, the legislature is considering Senate Bill 847 during the 2025 regular session currently underway. If passed, Senate Bill 847 would increase and expand health insurance subsidies for PERS retirees. This would cause higher contribution rates starting in the 2027-2029 biennium. The current forecast has not been adjusted to include higher rate assumptions due to PERS legislation in the out years of the forecast. When staff receives more information from PERS on future impacts, we'll incorporate those assumptions into our future forecast versions. So we have been in a state of structural imbalance where our revenues are growing at a slower pace than our expenditures for many years, and we've taken significant steps to maintain a balanced system. We've implemented budget strategies in most years of this time period. These strategies represent a mix of service reductions, efficiencies, realignment where we move services to other funds where appropriate, and revenue increases such as increasing service fees. While many of the strategies were ongoing in nature, some were one-time or had other limited duration terms. With the reductions included in an amended proposed budget, $91 million in adjustments would be made through the end of the next biennium. The result of all these strategies over time is a very lean organization. While we continue to look at ways to be as efficient as possible and streamline service delivery, as we look to our future, the impacts of the reductions have been felt within our organization and by the community as service areas have been reduced. At the same time, our community is growing and has increased service demands. So this chart compares the general fund adopted budget revenues and expenses. The dashed green line shows revenues, and the solid blue line shows expenditures. And these lines include budget strategies from the previous slide as indicated by the orange arrows. So while our revenues do grow over time, they are not growing as quickly as our expenditures. The budget strategies are necessary to better align expenses with available revenues and manage our reserves so that we have an adequate savings account for unexpected events as we look to the future. Many factors cause expenses to grow faster than revenues, including high inflation, continued increased PERS costs, and meeting the needs of a growing population. Given the limited growth of our current general fund revenues, additional budget strategies will continue to be necessary, not only to live within our means, but also to maintain adequate reserves, which have remained below our target level as we came out of the pandemic. So here is a look at how all of those decreases over time have impacted positions which provide service to our community. This slide is over the same time period showing total citywide FTE per 1,000 population across all funds. The trend has remained largely flat following recession-era reductions. More recent increases in the last few years are primarily due to increases in non-general funds, such as the FTE added with the community safety payroll tax. While citywide FTE per 1,000 population has increased, we continue to remain about 8% below pre-recession levels. So when we think back to FY88, this is when we started seeing changes at the state level, which started impacting and causing more of our structural imbalance. At that time, our FTE per 1,000 was 10.3. And with the amended 25-27 budget, our FTE per thousand would be 9.3 across all funds. When we look at the same chart for the general fund, so again, this is just our general fund FTE, we can see that the FTE per thousand population has continuously declined as we've implemented budget strategies in the general fund. We now have fewer general fund employees providing services to a growing Eugene population, and the current FTE per thousand population as a result of the amended budget is about 26% below pre-recession levels. Some general fund FTE have been transferred to other funds as part of strategies, but the majority of FTE decline has been removal of positions from the system. So again, when we think back to FY88, our FTE per thousand in the general fund was 7.5, and with the amended 25-27 budget, our FTE per thousand in the general fund would be 4.3. So the city manager discussed our credit rating at last Monday's work session. The city has a strong credit with a rating of AA1, along with many of our peers in Oregon. Our credit rating agency, Moody's, has noted strong financial management of the city over many years in previous credit reviews. While Moody's looks at the range of factors in their analysis, they have consistently noted our strong reserve levels, our willingness to take action when necessary, and the expectation that the city's management team will deliver long-run structural balance featuring strong financial metrics. Our rating is important, as a downgrade in the city's current credit rating would result in higher borrowing costs, meaning that the interest rates the city would have to pay on bonds would increase if our rating decreased or our outlook was downgraded to negative. We could have a rating call with rating agencies later this year to issue revenue bonds for the airport expansion. The City Council will have a work session to begin discuss this topic on June 18th. Moody's also, Moody's also issues the credit impact score, which measures the impact of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG factors on an issuer's credit rating. The credit impact score ranges from a 1 to 5. A CIS-1 indicates that the present ESG attributes have a positive impact on the rating. The city currently holds a CIS-1 score with a high rating for governance. So now we'll talk a little bit about the impacts of all of the assumptions we've made in our forecast for our 2025-2027 budget. First, we'll look at our operating surplus or deficit. This helps us understand if we're living within our means. The red dotted line near the middle of the chart, which represents a neutral position where revenues equal expenditures. Anything above the red line is a surplus, and anything below the red line will be a deficit. The result of a surplus is an increase to our reserves, while a deficit reduces our reserves. So the solid blue line represents the 2025-2027 amended proposed biennial budget forecast, which includes the assumptions I've discussed so far this evening. This line shows the 2025-2027 biennium is budgeted to be in a surplus position. The improved position is due to the one-time general fund bridge strategy savings remaining in the general fund to provide stabilization to the fund rather than transferring to a new revenue fund. The surplus deficit then drops to a neutral position in 27-29 and then increases to a modest surplus in 2029-2031. All of these changes are also due to the current amended proposed budget reductions, as well as the payoff of pension bonds in fiscal year 28. The city's pension obligation bonds were issued in fiscal year 02 to pay down the estimated unfunded PERS actuarial liability at that time. Since then, the city has assessed a percentage of employee wages, currently at 3.75%, in order to pay the debt service on the bonds. The bonds are projected to be paid off in FY28, so 3.75% of wages will no longer be assessed after the debt is retired, which will reduce general fund expenditures starting in FY29. And the red dashed line really is a what-if scenario based on inflation. This shows higher inflation in the 25-27 biennium. If inflation is 5% per year in the biennium rather than the 2.7% currently projected, we would be in a deficit position in the 2025-2027 biennium, and we would deplete reserves by the 2029-2031 biennium, which would not be sustainable. Next, we'll look at our reserve for revenue shortfall, which is our savings account. This reserve is our financial cushion, which is a key part of our financial management. Having an adequate reserve allows us to weather unexpected events and take time to develop thoughtful, strategic responses rather than having to take immediate action to adjust services when something unexpected happens. Maintaining reserves in good economic times is key to weathering recessionary periods with minimal service disruptions. And additionally, as I've said, having a sufficient reserve is a strong factor in our credit rating, which translates again into lower borrowing costs for the city. So this first line here is our target. The previous reserve target was 8% of annual expenditures, but now that we've transitioned into a biennial budget, our target is 4% of biennial expenses. The 4% reserve target is approximately $17 million per biennium on average over the forecast period. The blue dotted line shows the forecasted reserve as of the 2025-2027 amended proposed biennial budget. The reserve is budgeted to be 4.3% of expenditures in the 2025-2027 biennium. The improvement in the reserve is due to the one-time general fund bridge saving strategies remaining in the reserve for revenue shortfall to provide stabilization for the fund. The reserve for revenue shortfall then drops to 3.8% of expenditures in the next biennium and reaches the 4% target in 2029-2031. Again, that same what-if scenario with higher inflation in the next 2 fiscal years. At 5%, due to the deficit this scenario causes that we saw in the previous slide, the reserve would be depleted coming into the 2027-2029 biennium. This is shown in the chart by dropping below the red horizontal line, which indicates 0 reserves. As we discussed earlier, forecasts are a point-in-time snapshot of our financial condition, which is based upon a set of assumptions. As we navigate economic uncertainty, it will be important to maintain strong reserve levels to respond to changing events. As always, we operate in a very dynamic environment, and we're always monitoring several areas of uncertainty as we look to the future. The first is evolving service needs. We continue to live in a dynamic world, and our needs continue to change and evolve. Underfunded service areas remain across the organization as we've had to constrain resources and expenditures. Another area is personnel costs. It's uncertain how long the current trends putting upward pressure on wages and retirement costs will last. Contracts for 3 union groups are negotiated on a 3-year rolling cycle, and the impact of bargaining on future personnel costs is uncertain as we look out into the later years of the forecast period. PERS rates are also anticipated to continue to rise, but that can change depending on market returns and other factors. With federal and state funding, staff continue to monitor events at the federal level to understand how the city might be impacted with all of the changes. We are currently also in the state legislative session and are monitoring legislation that could increase costs for the city to understand, and also looking to see how federal actions will impact the state and might impact our jurisdiction in other ways. We also watch distressed funds, which I'll talk about a bit later, but many funds were adversely impacted during the pandemic and the subsequent period of rising costs. We're closely monitoring several funds to evaluate if additional financial support is necessary for fund stability. And then inflation, as we've talked about, we've reviewed the current forecast, but recent economic events are likely to have upward pressure on inflation. As I mentioned, we'll receive the next state economist forecast on inflation on May 14th. If inflation increases and persists for a longer time over what is currently anticipated by the state economist, this could have a significant impact on our forecast as we look to the future. And then finally, the economy in general. There's ongoing uncertainty in the national and global economies due to recent events, including the impact of recent federal actions, potential future actions by the Federal Reserve, and the possibility of an economic recession. So we are watching several funds. While our focus tonight really has been on the general fund, I do want to mention a few funds we're watching that may experience financial distress as we look to the future. The first is the Ambulance Transport Fund, or ATF. They've recently seen transport volumes return to pre-pandemic levels, which helped revenue recover from the effects of the pandemic. In addition to increasing transport revenue, Ground Emergency Medical Transport Funds, or GEMT, have also helped improve the stability of the fund by providing additional revenue in recent years. However, current GEMT revenue has been delayed due to system limitations at Oregon Health Authority, and despite the increases in revenue, the major risk to the ATF in the out years continues to be expenses outpacing revenue generation. To help stabilize the ATF, the department began an EMS redesign project in FY23 to help align revenue and costs for ambulance transport system. As part of the redesign project, the department has created the new single-role paramedic positions and EMT positions to work on medic units. These new positions are a lower-cost FTE than a traditional dual-role firefighter-paramedic that have historically staffed this service. The department will continue to evaluate the system design for potential expense savings in the coming years. The general fund has budgeted a one-time investment in the 2025-2027 biennium of just over $1 million to provide support if needed as we navigate through receiving revenues and understanding system impacts. The Parking Enterprise Fund accounts for the city's on-street and off-street parking systems, as well as enforcement and adjudication services. The onset of COVID had an immediate and negative impact on parking revenues. The Parking Fund's revenue has been slow to recover, complicated by significant staffing vacancies related to enforcement and equipment vandalism that has impaired the collection of revenue. Staff are addressing these areas, and the fund is anticipated to break even by the end of fiscal year 25. As we look to the upcoming biennium, the Parking Fund is still recovering, and we'll be looking at revenue generation to address the growing amount of deferred maintenance related to the city's parking system and garages. The Telecom Fund revenue has stabilized after declining for several years due to changes in federal regulations and the technology environment. Historically, this fund has provided critical support to a variety of telecom-related expenditures, including support for public safety IT services, the city's website, Metro TV service, and IT equipment purchases. Telecom funding for expenditures has been reduced in the current biennium to bring the fund closer to stability, and staff are looking at further reduction strategies in the coming biennium in future years to ensure a stable service system and ensure reserves over the forecast period. Staff are also continuing to closely monitor activity at the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, as decisions made through that federal body may impact the city's ability to collect the fees that support this fund. Next is the Public Safety Answering Point Fund, or the PSAP. The primary revenue source for PSAP is the State of Oregon Emergency Communications Tax, or the 911 tax. Following two increases to the 911 tax rate in FY20 and 21, tax distributions have remained flat since FY23. Expenditures within this fund are primarily related to 911 call-taking personnel and supervision. Flat revenue projections and rising personnel costs have pushed this fund into a forecasted annual deficit beginning in the next biennium. Personnel savings from vacant call-taking positions in recent years have helped the fund build a strong reserve, mitigating the short-term effects of the projected annual deficit. However, risks remain as we look to the long term once positions are fully staffed, as revenues won't be able to cover the costs of the existing expenditures. To stabilize the fund long term, 911 leadership continues to explore potential sources of additional revenue and personnel cost control strategies. And then finally, the Road Fund. The primary revenue source for this fund is the State Highway Fund. The fund has a structural imbalance with projected revenues outpacing projected expenditures outpacing projected revenues. There are several unknowns with the State Highway Fund revenue, including the impact of high fuel prices in both the short and long term. The current labor market is also having a negative impact on the ability to complete projects. but vacancy savings will likely help stabilize the fund in the short term in the forecast period. To maintain a balanced budget, this fund will need to implement a future reduction strategy to reduce operating expenditures by about 8% beginning in FY '28 if state legislation is not passed to address transportation funding inadequacies statewide. And finally, the last slide here before I turn things back to the city manager, I'll briefly review the Urban Renewal Agency budget. The 2025-2027 proposed budget for the URA is $40.9 million across both the downtown and riverfront districts. The net budget is $33.5 million after removing interfund transfers of $7.4 million. Since the previous biennial budget was adopted 2 years ago, the plans for both districts have been amended to increase the spending limit and add project focus areas including housing, physical improvements to address safety and comfort in public spaces, and emerging projects. The agency board must approve all projects other than loans in excess of $250,000, and that step has already occurred for the projects included in this budget that exceed that threshold. More information regarding urban renewal projects can be found in the 2025-2027 proposed budget document. And now I'll turn things back to the city manager.
All right. Thanks for hanging in there. I know there's a lot of information. We're covering a 2-year budget with a lot of different things playing. So I want to talk a little bit before I dive into details about some of the factors and filters that overlaid the decision-making of the executive team as I walk through some of the reductions. And this is not all of the things, I'm just going to hit the highlights. The first one, this slide that I'm showing you here is talking about the different kinds of funding sources that each of the departments receives. And the reason why I bring it up, especially as you look at police, we'll just look at that one and then you can just extrapolate it to the others. While the general fund is the largest piece, there's promises made in each of the other pieces of the CSI, which is the blue cap on that, that requires certain things in the green bar to stay in place. So for each one of the departments, there's one of these, whether it's the library levy, the Parks and Rec levy, or the CSI. It just reduces the flexibility. So when you start thinking about what you can and can't do, we're constantly thinking about those promises made, promises kept. A couple other things I want to talk through. The first one being, looking at what are the things that only we can provide? What are services that, there's not a private sector version of or legally required to? And who out there in our partnership may be able to step in? So a good example for that would be when we start talking about alternative response and we talk about what the work that Lane County is doing around mobile crisis. When we talk about Amazon Pool, is there a possibility that there's a partner out there that may be able to operate that? The way we typically do that, as we have with some of the other contracts you'll talk about, is we recognize what the need is, we put out a request for proposals, we see who might be interested and capable of doing that, and then we negotiate a contract with them, and that's a possibility. So we tried to look at those things. We also looked across the city geographically and tried to understand where we really well-served in certain areas, where we underserved in certain areas, and we certainly factor that in. And then the instructions I gave to each of the department heads as we started navigating scenarios was to really think about protecting the core of the core. So that really, what that means for us, and each department head could talk to you about it, but what is the core, most single important mission of the police department, and make sure we're protecting that. So we're really trying to make sure that even as we're reducing, that we're providing a diverse set of services that serves our community as best we possibly can. Another thing that's been happening is over the last biennium and this biennium, we've been doing a number of organizational assessments. We did the fire and EMS, a deep dive into the finance of that and governance of that. We also did a look at our alternative response system to see what recommendations would be there. Those are completed, but we're currently working on 2 pretty significant ones. One is around our services at the Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services, so each of those divisions in the department, and a core business function review. And that box on the right talks about all of the things we do that we would consider core, kind of centralized service. For each of those, we are underway. We have a private party contractor working with us. They've been assessing our current state. They're looking at efficiencies. They're benchmarking us and will be producing us with future state operating models. So when we were looking at the proposed budget and the amended budget, we were trying not to jump the gun on some of the things that we think might actually come out of that report. That was easier to do in the proposed budget than the amended budget. All of that work led to the work that happened in December and January with the council, where I was asked to bring forward, like, what would some reduction scenarios look like if we needed to reduce 11.5 million? The first set of instructions for an exercise, this was not direction, it was an exercise, was what does it look like if we distribute that across the departments as they are currently funded in the general fund? And what does it look like if we protect the core of public safety? A lot of people referred to these as the monopoly cards, and again, they were illustrative, and we only used that percent to move through the exercise. Neither the proposed or the amended budget is built on percentages. That's just not how we do it. We're not an across the board. We work as a team to try to determine what is the best set of services we can provide with the dollars we have that allow us to be able to meet the council's vision, values, goals, respond to the community survey, respond to the strategic plan, our professional expertise, and more. This is going to be my point of privilege, quote unquote, as some of the counselors talk about. And before I start talking about jobs and services being reduced, I want to just give a little bit of gratitude and love for all of you in this room, the community, and remind everybody that while some of us value some services more than others, all of our services and programs are valued by members of our community and the people that are performing them. We've been here before, especially to employees that are nervous. We've been in these positions before. We know how to be a little bit nimble and protect and try to keep things whole as much as we can. We've had a lot of accomplishments over the last couple of years we're not going to talk about, and we're going to continue to have them, and so I just want to hold that. There's been a lot of stress. I know there's a lot of stress just looking across from me, and I have a lot of pride for the work this team has done under the worst of conditions. And then I'll just remind us that we will have to get back up and begin again, and we will. And if we had an emergency tonight, we're not going to have an ice storm tonight. I'm pretty confident about that. But if we had any kind of emergency tonight, everybody in this room would be staying to work us through it. So I'm going to go into how we made the reductions, and I'm going to start with this hearkening back to the $3.5 million. So that $3.5 million, the conversation we had with council when we talked about what should we be trying to build in if we can. So I think of this as being when you do, not all of them, but some of them, when you do a subscription online to Spotify or Netflix, are you going to pay for a month or are you going to do a recurring payment? And some of these things we've been paying 1 year at a time or 2 years at a time, and we're looking for a way to make it more sustainable. So that's, oh, sorry, I bust right through that. So what we had done was we kind of walked through the planned investment level. So the first column is all the things we tried to build in that made the $3.5 million gap. When we came with the proposed budget where we had to cut that, you can see some of those started to be reduced. And the amended budget reduces them more. And I'm only saying that because you can't get 11.5 when you count up all the departments unless you realize that I actually took these out of the forecast. So you'll see this balance beam happening. So for example, we planned to reinvest in the police vacancies, and we had to back some of that back out. That seemed to be more balanced than cutting actual programs. We may have to address some of these in a supplemental budget. The tables are organized not exactly like, sort of like the Monopoly cards were. You'll see on the left, it'll say P, that these are things that I included in the proposed budget, so that's the first one you saw. The A is the amended, and the AI is the amended investment, so the things you saw with the balance beam. And I'll start with the police department, which in the amended budget is 37% of the general fund. So these are all of the police reductions. As you can see, the proposed eliminated the last community safety officer we had in the general fund. We still have 19, I believe, in the community safety payroll tax. Our amended budget actually eliminates our animal services program, which includes our staff and our contract with Greenhill, so I'm trying to be really transparent about that. This reduces our community engagement team in half. Our community engagement team, most people relate to being the folks that are doing crime prevention services out in the community. They're doing safety events such as work in the police academy, and the Citizens Police Academy, National Night Out, Safety Town, things like that. Volunteers in policing administration, this reduces that team and reduces the amount of volunteer work we can do, kind of spread some of that work to other people. It doesn't fully eliminate the program. And elimination in the records unit, and again, the things that we took out of the forecast. Fire and emergency services, which represents 23% of the general fund, we really just focused on the alternative response. And that's because when you go deeper, you're looking at things like actually an engine company. And we've been down this road before, and so we were trying to avoid that. This is a good example of a place where we are working really closely with our partners at Lane County to understand what are the alternative response needs after they get fully up and running. And yeah, so that's where we're at with that. We're going to talk more about that. In fact, I think May 14th, we're going to do a bigger presentation just on our kind of emergency system and alternative response. Library, recreation, and cultural services, which represents 14% of the general fund. A lot going on here. So our proposed budget had a lot of position vacancy savings. The reason we were doing it in that way was to allow time for that study to complete, so we would be able to understand where are the more targeted and surgical ways we could shift in that department. A little bit of a funding realignment. And then when we get to the amended budget, you can see there's some pretty significant changes. The library changes includes a closure to the downtown library on Sundays and Mondays, but it also adds back Sunday hours to Bethel and Sheldon branches, trying to maintain as much service as possible. This closes the Amazon pool beginning October 1st, and some of our bridge strategies will allow that to stay open through the season. Amazon Pool has the highest operational cost and the smallest community impact when compared to the other year-round pools. The facility will also require significant capital upgrades in the future. The permanent staff that are assigned to this recreation program area, which is not a lot or will be reassigned or absorbed back, we tend to move people from Sheldon and Echo to Amazon for the summer, and so they will remain there. There'll be about 75 seasonal lifeguard positions that are impacted by this. Sheldon Community Center closure. This community center has the narrowest service profile, serving the fewest households and the highest facility cost of all of our community centers. That said, they provide an important service to the community that people value. And then the last piece here is the River House funding realignment. Again, we can talk more details about this later. I'm just trying to get through them all. Planning and development is only 7% general funded, but they have some very important general fund work. So in this, they weren't actually impacted with the proposed budget. The amended budget impacts the homeless service program in our homeless service team. This team provides coordination, shelter support, and unhoused communications and other support services. With the addition and potential expansion of state all-in funding, we've been working with Lane County and will continue to work with them and our service partners over the next year to assess what the needs are, define our roles and responsibility in order to try to transition away from that at the end of the year, if possible. This also includes a reduction in our business retention and expansion. Public Works is the smallest, 4% of the general fund, and their impacts include changes in our seasonal and contracted staffing and program funding realignment. That was part of the proposed. When we moved into the amended, you'll actually see an elimination of 2 vacant park specialists that do development park maintenance. We're eliminating a vacant analyst in the sustainability program that supports the research and coordination of the CAP 2.0. And we're reducing our park engagement and stewardship work as well. Central services about 15%. I'm not going to walk through all of these. Just see, there's a couple in here that I think, the downtown cleanup and beautification, this does not eliminate all of the work we're doing in the downtown. This is a small portion of that, but it will have some impact, so I wanted to at least pull that out. The other piece, our Office of Equity and Community Engagement, which supports our citywide equity efforts to advance belonging, staffs the Human Rights Commission, liaises with marginalized communities, supports neighborhood associations, and partners with city departments on outreach and engagement. This reduces that entire program by about 42%. 3 FTEs will remain to support equity and engagement work. These other impacts are significant if you're an employee in this room and you're needing to get this work done, but I'm not going to spend the time on it tonight because we have a lot to cover. So overall, when we start to look at our personnel reductions, we've broken it down by employee group. We've been holding vacant positions since we knew that we were looking at potentially losing this revenue. So what that means is that there's less filled positions that are being reduced, so less people that are impacted, but the FTE is reduced, and that is a service area reduction. So the largest being our temporary employees, actually, and that's a rough number because it's hard to pick that. They don't sit in employee numbers as well, but that's about what we think. The next highest being AFSCME, followed by our non-represented employees, EPEA, and IAFF. Quickly, our budget also includes some one-time investments that I think I'll just point out 3. One of them is repaying the City Hall loan. That saves us all of the interest payments in the future. Is responsible, good thing to do, so we're building that in. It's always easier to build in one-time investments, especially if they save us money in the long term. We pulled out the Human Services Commission funding from that hopeful list of recurring payments and have shifted back to funding them through this biennium, and then we'll need to continue looking for solutions for that. And then there's some dollars here for long-range financial planning, and that's really intended to support the work that the council has said they want to do around having a retreat, looking at long-term financial stability, potentially bringing forward a community group, and this allows us to support that work with some outside resources. We've talked a lot about the bridge or the ramp. You know, we talked about a potential bridge until we could collect revenue, and which could still be a need, or a ramp to transition our services. So these are the areas where we found, Twyla had earlier talked about the savings we had in the health rate. That's one-time dollars that we can utilize for that bridge. And we've been very creative about whatever we could fund that was eligible for opioid that was already funded in the general fund, that we can shift those funding one time, and some one-time land sales. Okay, I think that's it. This is the last slide. Wanted to point out, so again, these are the times you're scheduled to meet. The next meeting, we'll have 2 shorter presentations. One on being other funding pressures. We want to share with you the other things that are out there, the levies and payroll tax, and some of the deadlines associated with that, so you just have the context of that. And the chief will do a presentation on our emergency response system, in particular looking at the things that we're doing that are not the classic fire and EMS work, but more alternative. With that, you've made it through a long presentation. Sure appreciate you and the difficult decisions we have ahead of us. Thanks.
Thank you, City Manager. Our next step is that we're going to have a round-robin opportunity to ask questions and discuss what we've just heard. I'm going to have a couple notes I'm going to make before we dive into that, partially just to give us all a chance to digest a little bit from all of that, but I will go to the right when I do start. Before we start that discussion, I do want to remind us that in terms of our work tonight, we're looking for questions and discussion on the presentation and the proposal we just heard. We are, of course, all aware that there are sort of parallel efforts going on right now in council discussions that could potentially change a lot of what we just heard after we finish our budget process. For tonight's purposes, our goal is not to discuss potentialities, and I'm hoping we can keep tonight's conversation about this proposed version of the budget that we're working on. And that is through the Budget Committee's work and charge and this cycle, that is in this committee where we're going to try to keep all of our focus. And so with that, I'm going to go all the committee members going to the right, ending with myself. Then I'll give our mayor an opportunity to join our discussion as well. And then if anyone needs a second round at that point, we'll use a queue for that. So, Councilor Evans.
I'm going to pass.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, several questions. On slide 11, non-departmental part of the general fund, what's in that exactly? $70.7 million.
Thank you, Councilor Zelenka. So the non-departmental is ending fund balance, reserves, and then transfers out to other funds. So when you think about the fund balance and reserve levels in the fund, that's the majority of.
That's different than interfund transfers, or that includes interfund transfers? That is interfund transfers.
That does include transfers
Okay.
to other funds, yes.
So that's the part of the budget that's interfund transfers.
Yes,
That,
it's a non-departmental.
yeah, so if you're doing a net general fund, you'd take that out to get to the operating general fund. Okay, and do you happen to know what personnel is as a percent of the general fund cost operating budget? We roughly throw around 80% usually.
Yeah, I think it's usually just over 75, between 75 and 80, but yeah, about 75%. Takes people to deliver services.
On slide 18, I always find this one fascinating to me. What it really talks to me about is growth as the balancing strategy for the $11 million and why that doesn't work. Because we need the money immediately. So not to say that you don't do it, that's a good thing to be doing, but it's not a short-term strategy. To get 11.5 million just back of the envelope, you need 5,750 new homes like that, or 10 to 13 new Valley River centers instantly, or 100 of these big, huge Franklin towers to get to 11.5 million, any one of those combinations. So that's why it doesn't work as a short-term strategy. Long-term strategy, it's a good thing to do. Slides 33 through 36, those are some of my favorite graphs to tell the story about what's been going on with the budget. Lots of general fund cuts. All that fat and efficiency people think is in there is gone. That $91 million over the last couple of years. Lowest FTE per 1,000 in 18 years. Same for the citywide services. And lowest, so what that means to me is that we have a pretty lean organization. It's well managed, and we've been pretty good stewards of our tax dollars. So I think that speaks to the financial management of the city. So on the last part, is there a timer? The last part of the slides about the city manager put together really points to its zero-sum nature of the budget, that if you prioritize one part of this budget, you have to deprioritize the other one. So if you decrease the cuts in one area, you have to increase the cuts in the other area. Right? That's correct. Okay.
Thank you, and my apologies, I did miss the part of the script where I was going to remind everyone that we do have the 3-minute timer on for the round robin, and flashes red at 15 seconds. Also, the reminder for those of us who haven't been in the room as often, we have a button to mute and unmute your microphone, so please press that and see that red light before you start speaking, and then press it again when you're done. And with that, Siobhan.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I have a couple preliminary questions and then just some clarifying ones. So when we talk about it's slide 23, when we talk about the property tax exemptions, are charitable organizations nonprofits?
Yes, so nonprofits would be exempt, yes.
Okay, just wanted to clarify because I know we have a lot of them. My other question was, time's running. So I just wanted to clarify that it looks like the EPD community engagement, that's going away completely. So there will be no,
It's half the team.
half the team. Perfect, thank you. That doesn't affect any of the community safety officers, does it?
There's one community safety officer eliminated in the general fund, but we have 19 in the CSPT.
Thank you. And then just as I was going through all this, I have a general question. So when you see one FTE and then you see the amount of the money allotted for it, that's not just the salary, right? That includes like medical benefits, their retirement package, all that good stuff.
Yes, fully loaded, and then if there are materials and supplies associated with the position that are going away, those would be part of that total as well.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you. I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. I know that Councilor Keating is currently in transit. He is also with us on Zoom, and I will turn to him if we hit the end of the round robin, but I'm going to see if he gets here to join us in person in time first. So for the moment, I'm going to move on to Wendy.
Thank you for that presentation and hard work. Just a couple of questions. As far as on the pools, well, I'm concerned about so many things, but regarding the pools, have you, and you mentioned the possibility of contracting out, do you know other cities who've gone that way, and can they provide, or what were you going to say?
I don't have any details about that, but we can follow up on that.
Okay. And then you mentioned Green Hill, that would be completely shut down, or?
So the amended budget eliminates the funding for our contract. It doesn't shut down Green Hill, it just eliminates
That's our
our
contract.
piece, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then just a comment on the library, just to support maybe, I know we'd have to find a way to restore some funds, but just trying to save another day and just how much, multiple programs there serve people of all ages. They help the most vulnerable and giving them a welcoming and safe place to be, especially in adverse weather conditions, the library promotes community engagement, literacy, education, provide help for job searches, help people find employment, boosting our local economy. They provide access to technology, supporting all students from K through 12 to graduate schools, graduate students and lifelong learners. By providing this safe space, again, it also prevents crime, and I could go on, but those were some of the things off the top of my head about the library. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, sir. Manager, thank you. Twyla, thank you. Staff and execs, thank you for all the hard work of putting this together. It had to have been excruciating, so it also had to be done. And so, thank you. I would like to make the opposite point, oddly, my friend Alan, which is that it's my belief that we are in this problem, and we have made cuts in many previous years. That was clear. We are in that problem because we have spent ourselves to the spending limit. As much as we can spend, we have for many years. That's been our habit. And that's what the community has asked us to do in many cases. But what we haven't done is the hard work of the long-term strategy. We, every year, talk about a short-term strategy and say, well, but we don't have time to get that money, so we can't do a long-term strategy, and we avoid the work. The most important work, I think, that the council needs to do, and I hope we're actually doing it this year. I appreciate Greg's initial motion on that, is to do the job of saying, okay, as Ellen mentioned, how many houses is it? How many businesses is it that we need to grow here? And how do we do that in order to have a long-term, sustainable budget that pays for the services we hope to have? And until we do that, we're going to have this problem every single year. So I sincerely hope the council takes that work very seriously, works with some experts, and delves into what new creations in our community, in the way of businesses, homes, and taxable property, does it take in order to alter the long-term revenue projection and growth of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach?
First, thank you to staff for all of the very hard work that went into this document. This is a very hard budget. I don't think any of us is happy to see the proposed cuts in this document to libraries, pools, Green Hill, and a wide variety of areas in our city. I think it shows just how important it is that the city work with our partners at Oregon League of Cities to address Measure 5 and 50 reform. As was just pointed out earlier in this conversation, because of the adjusted property ratio, new construction often actually costs us more to service than we receive in tax revenue. And so we're in the unfortunate situation that growth will not actually help us, and actually in some ways might actually hurt our situation, given our assessed values are, in some cases only 40% of the market value. And unfortunately, we're in a very difficult situation. And so I hope that our community partners will partner with the city as we work on Measure 5 and 50 reform at the state level. Could we go to slide 28, please? Do we have a sense of when PERS costs are expected to peak and begin to start coming down again? Or is this just a ever larger hill that we're gonna, eventually be spending 50% or more of our payroll on PERS costs?
Yes, thank you for the question. The state actuary, the actuary that works with the PERS board actually has some long-range tables, and they do actually show PERS costs flattening out. It seems to be a rolling 10 years, though, because it's a graph that goes like this, and as you get to kind of the part that flattens, every cycle it seems like that gets pushed out farther, because the majority of the costs, when you think about that chart, the majority of the costs of the system are for retirees and inactive employees, Tier 1, Tier 2 employees. It's really when those people are no longer with us and those costs are no longer part of the system, that's when you see that leveling and maybe a decrease in the out years, pending any other reforms at the state level.
Thank you for that. Could go to slide number 49. The Green Hill contract is listed as $200,000 of investments as one-time investments turned to, ideally ongoing investments. What's the actual cost of the Green Hill contract?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know that number off the top of my head. Thank you for bringing it up, though, because I forgot to mention that if you recall, in the last biennium, you restored a portion of the Green Hill contract one time, and that's what that was representing in that one chart. The 200,000 was what you restored one time. We tried to build it in ongoing as part of our proposed budget, and then we had to take it out as part of the amended budget. So the total contract amount is about $487 a year.
So that would be the actual amount if we wanted to fully fund that contract ongoing, not just the 200,000 listed here.
Correct. Yeah.
Could we go to slide 52, please? I'm trying to understand this. So it looks like in the base budget, we're only building in an alternative response for the first year. And so it's getting, alternative response is getting phased out under the base budget or the amended budget, both.
I would say that the way I would describe that, and again, we'll have a presentation about this on the 14th, I would describe it as when we were looking for like where places we can find savings, as Lane County was ramping up, we thought, well, maybe there's some savings we can have there over the biennium with a transition. We didn't anticipate that we were going to get notified by Cahoots that they were, or Whitebird, that they were no longer to do that. So when we did the amended budget, we removed all of it. I would say, and we will continue to say, that as we see what Lane County is able to do and where the gaps actually are, we may end up in a position where we put out a new request for proposals for what that service level is in the gap. And I'll let the chief talk about that on May 14th. But this was anticipated that we'd be transitioning some of those costs, and then post-notification, we eliminated them.
What's been the green contract historically, the amount?
Yeah, under $1 million a year, but just under, like
so
877 or 900, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm very concerned about the loss of Cahoots in our community. Every month that they are not in service, it's harder to bring them back. There's a loss of institutional memory. Are there any opportunities to potentially bring them back with a lower hours of service and paying them a similar rate to what they get in Springfield?
I think that would be actually, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I think it would be best if we answered that on the 14th, if that's possible.
One of the things that we talked a lot about is just the confusion that's created as people are calling in, and the uncertainty of the staffing levels and the timing when those services would be available, make it a bit difficult to administratively and operationally administer. And so while that program area is working through changes, what we're trying to do is assess what our gaps are in the system and working with our partners, and there may be some opportunities to look to the future. But we'll talk about that more on the 14th.
Okay. I'm hoping we can figure out a way to bring back alternative response, ideally Cahoots, as quickly as possible. And so I'll just continue to ask questions and hope that there are opportunities to bring them back sooner rather than later before their expertise is lost. Thank you.
Did you need something, Councilor Evans?
I was just going to ask for a point of clarification as far as animal service is concerned. We've got Green Hill, and then we also have the city operates the facility on First Street.
Yeah,
Correct?
that's an entirely different service area. Yeah,
Entirely different than,
yes. That's not what's here. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
So we're not talking about First Street at all in this.
Not with this specific item.
I just needed some clarity
Yeah.
on that.
Thank you. Councilor Kaczynski.
Okay, I have several different questions. On slide 12, it looks at the operating budgets for different departments with the general fund versus other funds. For library, recreation, and cultural services, does that include the cultural services sub-fund within that general fund number?
Actually. This is where we need clarification versus whether it's the sub-fund or the reporting fund. So this is the sub-fund. So under library, recreation, cultural services, the cultural services sub-fund would be listed under the other funds in this presentation.
Thank you. So second question, the priority-based budgeting program inventory that was part of the council January 15th work session packet, is that still the most recent, best one to be looking at if we want to look at that type of thing?
The program inventory that's in the adopted budget from the 23-25 is actually, and those materials are what we have. We will be updating the program costing and the program section in the adopted budget for the 25-27 budget that comes out in the summer after council takes action.
I want to understand some of the impacts of eliminating the animal welfare program. And so, under this proposal, what would happen if a police officer arrested a drunk driver and they had a dog in their car? Like, what would happen?
Chief, you're going to have to come up to the table. And I think there's one down there with a microphone. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Skinner. I'm your Chief of Police here in the city of Eugene, and thank you for the question. Likely what would happen if we arrested an intoxicated driver and they had an animal in their car, we would operationally make phone calls for somebody to come pick up the animal. Oftentimes in that situation, there's family members that come and get the animal. In the event that we would have to shelter the animal, the officer would either transport, or we'd have a community service officer that actually has cages available in the back of their trucks to be able to come to the scene and transport the animal.
Where would they transport them to?
Well, right now, we'd transport them to Green Hill.
But if we're not contracting with Green Hill, where would we transport them to?
Well, we'd have to figure out what the other alternative shelter situations would be.
Okay. And if a dog attacked and seriously injured somebody, what would happen?
Police officers are equipped and skilled to be able to investigate those crimes
Okay.
or
and-
dangerous dog situations, and up to and include neglect and abuse cases.
Okay, and then they would take if they had to remove the animal, they would take it where?
We would figure out what shelter services are available to us.
Okay, thank you. I still have like a minute and 45 seconds. I feel like, first of all, I almost forgot to say this. I dived into my questions so fast. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been such an incredibly hard budget, an incredibly hard process, and not just for the people in this room and on this leadership team, but for the community members who rely on these services and for the employees who provide these services. So I just want to acknowledge the care and thought you've put into this process and the impact this is having on everybody in our community. I had, I think, one last question at this time. I feel like you've done a very good job over the years of providing a lot of clarity and moving things that feel to the community like ongoing services that were funded with one-time funding, and moving those into either ongoing funding or providing transparency when those things are going away. Do we have, and I didn't see many places in this budget where it was like, this is one-time funding that's not continuing. I don't think I need the answer right now, but if there are places where there are things that our community would feel was an ongoing service that aren't going to be continuing under this budget because they're not going to have one-time money for them allocated, that would be great to know about. So that's a question there, and
Thank you. I'm going to go with the order of Councilor Groves and then come back to Councilor Keating, and then we'll go to the other side of the table.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah and Twyla and your staffs for putting this together. I won't repeat what Twyla just said, but or Councilor Kaczynski just said, but I totally agree with what she said about our workforce and our public and what they're going through with us. There's going to be certainly a sense of loss, no matter where we end up. I was going to initially stick with just questions I had, but I kind of want to respond to some of what I've heard going around the table. I agree with Councilor Clark that managed growth in the right kind of growth, especially around economic growth, is good for this. It's good for our system, and it is going to provide work towards having a longer-term sustainable budget. We need to be working on this issue short-term, medium-term, and long-term. The other thing I want to point out that I was thinking about as I was listening, this isn't just about property tax. This is also about people having living wage jobs, which is the other half of affordable housing. We talk about affordable housing all the time, but the other half is having wages that can support living, lifestyles, and other businesses. So this is like a circle. We need to take care and watch and work with all the different components that feed into this. Okay, so going to some of my specific questions. Slide 18, what caused the spike in Lane County property tax ratio by year 21, FY '21. Slide 18, fiscal year '21. Seemed like a big uptick, and then it came down again.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maurizio. I work in the Finance Division. Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, because I don't see that slide, change property ratio, what I suspect, I can't say with certainty, but what I suspect, that is the commercial change property ratio. I don't know exactly how Lane County does all their valuations, but one thing they take into consideration is revenue that businesses bring in. And if a business during the pandemic shut down, and also business personal property in the business, if they moved all of that out. So if it was a thriving business, went to a vacant business, that would lower their real market value, which would affect that. That would be my suspicion. I can't say that with certainty.
Thank you. I suspected it was something like that, but that goes to what I was just saying about there's more to it than just property tax that's involved. My next question is, do the inflation projections for CPI, which is on slide 26, do they take into account the effects of upward pressure from tariffs?
Thank you, Councilor Groves. No, so this was based on the last state economist update, which had not incorporated any tariff assumptions. So that's why we're really looking to see what's going to come out on May 14th to understand what recent actions have impacted on the forecast, both for the coming year and out through the forecast period.
Thank you. So that means it could get worse. I think enough's been said about alternative response and cahoots, but that's something I am concerned about as well. It does, without it, we erode at our response capabilities in police and fire, and that's something I'm concerned about. Another question, the library reductions, closing down, proposed closure of the downtown library during certain days, but opening up the branch libraries. I've seen some chatter about this on social media, and I'm guessing that it's a lower staffing level that we're talking about at the branch libraries than what it takes to open the downtown library. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you. The answer is that's correct. How will the reduction, okay, I'm out of time. Thank you. I'll save my questions, the rest of my questions for later.
Thank you. Councilor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff and colleagues, for your patience with me while I was participating telephonically. This is a most sobering and deeply disturbing amended budget. It's Elon Musk on steroids with a chainsaw ripping through the municipality. Animal services cut, gutting Green Hill, unconscionable. Cuts into public safety, making downtown less safe. There are a host of serious public safety concerns in this budget. Alternative response, I too long for a Cahoots 2.0, whether that's under a new nonprofit, collaborating with our county partners, a statewide effort. I look forward to our next work session and more updates on what a new alternative response looks like. I have questions, City Manager and staff, about our Moody's rating. As I understand it, we're third in the state. Ranked third, top 5. What actions could a municipality take that would lower our Moody's rating?
Councilor Keating, there are a number of things that could happen. One would be not responding to economic events and downturns in a timely manner. using our reserves and having low fund balance where we are not managing for the future and having that long-term financial outlook. So part of it is around how we manage our funds, how we have reserves. They're looking at decisions we make. You know, they're as city manager mentioned on Monday night, they ask a range of questions when we have our ratings call. They ask about everything we're doing. They used to only just focus on the general fund. They're now looking more broadly at all funds across the city and looking at all of those issues. So, and there are many factors that can impact that, but it's really about how we're managing through uncertainty and change, and if we're willing to take the actions to work towards a sustainable budget and have adequate reserves.
If we took risks and were downgraded, what ballpark would we be downgraded to? Are there municipalities that have lower ratings than us that we would fall into that are similar size that you could point to?
We're a highly rated agency. We're a AA1, so we only have one notch to go up, which would be a AAA, which is more like your Portland. We would need different economic engines in our community to actually get a AAA rating, I believe. So there, you know, there's a range of things they look at when they place a rating on a city. You know, anything that's, you know, in the A category is investment grade. So whether you're a AA1, a AA2, you're still a strong credit. And we happen to be a very strong credit. So
We're a AA.
we're a AA1.
Have we ever been downgraded?
No. Very strong credit rating.
Have we embraced, city manager, you alluded to at the top of the conversation, not filling vacancies, hiring freezes. Have we embraced an early separation incentive in addition to not filling vacancies?
So we have not put that out as a strategy right now, and I'll tell you why. We did it during the Great Recession, but we did it with you could get an early separation. Departments could offer an early separation, but a position actually had to be eliminated from the budget. If you just do an early separation and you say, hey, we're offering early separations, and people leave the organization, it costs us a lot of money, and it may be positions we actually have to refill. So it would have to be a very targeted, we see a position that could go away. Our contracts and our non-reps have severance options currently. So when we eliminate a position, those options are out there. But we're not trying to incent people to leave right now. We're actually trying to weather the storm.
Yeah. Land. A few of my colleagues have brought up property. And I look on page 12, slide 24, the top 10 property taxpayers. And seemingly, we're land rich and deficit heavy as a municipality. Are we engaging in any effort, or has there been a recent assessment on property that could be sold? Because if we own it, we're not benefiting from the property tax. Where are we roughly in the amount of property that's attractive to a potential buyer that could bolster the slide we see on 24 and help fill a critically important gap?
Yeah, so we do have we built some strategies into your 23-25 budget to sell properties, and you actually took action to do that. You sold 2 downtown properties to the Urban Renewal District to be developed, which we're currently working on an RFQ for the Butterfly Lot, north part of the Butterfly Lot. This budget anticipates another $2 million. One time, you only get it one time, so it's not a good, sustainable, like forever solution, but this one also anticipated a $2 million property sale to help us bridge to a future revenue or to help us transition through closures. So those would include properties, again, that are properties we feel like could be surplused and sold. There's been discussions about other properties, like selling parks and letting somebody develop it into residential. Staff is not pursuing that. That would be a council discussion and policy direction. We're looking at ones we have right now that would make sense.
Speaking of parks or the library or fire, is there a potential for districts for folding into districts or creating tax districts that would detether heavy, big-ticket items from our budget.
So we did some work on this as part of the revenue advisor work, and I think we can include that in our follow-up information. Each one of those, I mean, people have brought up a parks district, people have brought up a library district, a fire district. Each one of those has different feasibility and different possibilities. There's very little room in our $10 cap before we're in compression. I think it's like 34 cents. And so those costs may move away from the city if you, it's just, there's a lot to it. So it's pretty complex and I think could be the point of a future presentation.
Thank you, City Manager, staff, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thought I was signing up for something fun being on Budget Committee. This isn't fun at all. Staff, appreciate all the time and energy put into this. I mean, I've been sitting here looking at this 16.85 number, and obviously it's a number on a slide, but it's people's jobs, it's community members, it's our neighbors, it's people that, you know, could be a paycheck away from being homeless. And not only that, but then the programs that it affects. And the programs that are going to be affected are programs that touch our most vulnerable in our community. And it's a humbling experience to be here, and I hope that we do good work here today and moving forward in these next couple of meetings to find solutions that can save some of these things. But thanks again for the work. I had some clarifying questions. On slide 17, I was just curious about that dotted line, the 3.4% that I just didn't catch the explanation for, the without frozen base increase. Slide 17, the 3.4%, just a clarification on that difference between that 3.4 and the 3.8.
Oh, yes. So that was in relation to the frozen base. There was a frozen base action that was taken as part of the 23-25 budget. Without that increase, we would have, our change, we would have landed at 3.4% instead of the 3.8% that we actually landed at.
Explain it. So the urban renewal districts, when they're created, it freezes the tax base, right? And then the monies from that stay inside the district. So as part of the 23-25, we voluntarily lifted it, which let that money flow into the general fund. Otherwise, it would have stayed in the district and it would have been at 3.4. Okay.
Heard. Yeah. We had urban renewal districts where I was on city council. It was just a little bit different back in Idaho than I was here, I'll tell you that. So my next question was, and I don't know if this is more of a hypothetical question, I guess, but with all of these temporary jobs and Amazon pool closure and things like that, there was a mention of, you know, maintenance, but do we even have a ballpark, or is it the right line of reasoning to think that if we are shutting down Amazon pool, that that's going to compound deferred maintenance because the pool isn't being operational? That makes sense?
Yeah, totally. So our cost anticipate, where we wouldn't just turn it off and let the pool, whatever. So we anticipate some of those costs. And if we were able to find another provider, we've also anticipated some maintenance savings actually in some of that work as well. But it's too soon to tell, so we've been very conservative about that.
I think that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to note we have 4 speakers left in our round robin. I think offering a second round is important with the complexity of this conversation. We have a few minutes of wrap up that we need to do, and we have 7 minutes left in our agenda. So I'm going to ask for a motion from our vice chair.
Mr. Chair, I move to extend the meeting time by 15 minutes.
I have a second from Councillor Keating. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. With that, Councillor Leach.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Begin again. Here we go. I have a few questions, and I don't know if I'm going to get quite to where I'm trying to go, but I look at the budget, and it's kind of 3 categories, right? Personnel, materials and services, capital. And I think we can all understand personnel very easily. We know what a police officer is. We know what a librarian is. And that's what's required. Capital, easy enough. We need a vehicle for a police officer. But I think lies so much within materials and services that I think I and our community get lost within that category. That's where we find contracts for animal services or with Cahoots, or that's where we're purchasing all of our library books, I assume. Like, there's a lot of assumptions that we, have feelings about, and so much mysticism, right? So just kind of perusing the online budget, and I'm just giving this as an example, but we have $24 million in our police materials and services within the general fund, and no idea where that's really going. I can, again, uniforms and things, I can make stuff up. Is there a way to have a better breakdown of what those look like so that we can have an idea of what is it? And when I look at the reductions, I see mostly that those are in FTE, and then just kind of this like unknown piece of what's being cut in materials and services, other than maybe the programs that you've identified. So I think that's where I find it hard to connect the dots. And in one of those is I found just in our city overview page, and there's no numbers associated with it, but it says, and we didn't really go over this unless I didn't catch it, that our city-supported shelters are not included in this budget, meaning that 228 of our shelter spaces will not be funded unless our state funding that we've asked for at the legislature comes through. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. For the last 2 years, we've actually received something on the order of about $3.8 million a year to fund the bulk of shelters that have contracts administered through the city. In this legislative session, the bill that's going through is looking at a couple things. One, I think extending the state funding to look at what would be alternative shelters, so the ones that aren't currently included in the state funding. And then also looking at funding for more than 1 year, maybe 2 years. So we are waiting to see what happens with that bill, but it's not in our budget.
Not great.
I'm just going to jump in too. I think we could provide a little bit more detail around like what's in that line item around, without going specific dollar by dollar, at least be able to describe the materials and supplies pays for facilities, vehicles, all of our contracts for services, concrete, gravel, all of that. So it's not just like uniforms and pencils, it's a lot of things. And we can better refine that for you.
That would be really incredible. I appreciate that. And I also really appreciate a deeper dive on the 14th into their alternative response. I've been begging for, and you've hit all of the marks that I have asked to cover within that. So I'm really looking forward to that and what we can do to analyze those gaps and hopefully fill those gaps and figure out a mechanism within this to do so. So thank you again for all of your work, and let's keep going.
Thank you, Councilor Ye.
Thank you. As I was listening to the presentation, I was thinking to myself, how glad I am to be doing this work with these people in this room. I have found that the ongoing, thoughtful, collaborative process that goes on almost the entire year to work on our budget is just amazing and takes so many different people. Our staff works so hard to explain these complex concepts, this budget, in a way that the budget committee and the community and myself can understand better, and gives us the time to ask these questions. And I have never been so more secondhand offended by comparing you to what's going on at the federal government, which is the opposite of all of those things that I have just said. And I just want you to know that that is how I feel about this situation, even though it's so hard. This is the team I would want to do this with, and I'm glad we're all here together. My questions aren't maybe necessarily at today, because this might be things that we are going into later on in the others. I'm wondering if there's going to be in the 14th or another meeting, are we going to dig into this, the homeless service program transition, what all is in there? Is that part of one of those discussions?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, it doesn't have to be today, but just like a list of what that is, I would, because that could be a lot of things, and maybe it's just contracts, but I was unclear about that. The other area I would appreciate more clarity is around our Office of Equity and Community Engagement and how those reductions are going to affect our ability to provide those services in our community at a time where it seems ever-presently important to be working on inclusion. So I'm just curious as to what parts of the work that office does is going to be affected. Yeah. Those are my two big questions that I want back.
Thank you. Ryan?
Thank you to city staff. Really great job, and I think from my time on budget committee, I keep seeing the closing gap, and I keep, we're getting closer there, and I really appreciate that work, because when I started, the gap was very wide, and now it's closing. And I echo the concerns too about, how do we grow, thinking about the staff that might be impacted by this. I'd love to see any ways we can preserve as many staff as possible. I know that's never perfectly possible, but keeping folks employed helps deliver those amazing services the city's come to know. That was my first question, and it might be probably some napkin math, but I was just curious, of those savings we're doing, how much are purely just FTE savings? It's okay if you follow up too. Yeah. Okay, perfect. And then, so one of the questions, and maybe I missed exactly how it was, so the slide 49, just talking about the investments, it's kind of like one time investing in things. I was curious, what's the savings, long-term savings? And I think that was kind of alluded to in like 58, and then again, we could follow up later. But I was curious, kind of like when we invest $1 million, it's gonna save us, X amount later. So I was curious about kind of how much more are we gonna get in savings when we do that?
Right. I think you're actually talking about a slide that's a little bit later, the one where we pay off the city hall loan? Yeah, okay, so slide 58, okay. Good. We will follow up on that. Thanks.
Perfect, yeah, just curious,
Yeah.
what's the bang for the buck we're getting there? On the library, when we looked at the days being reduced, did we look at the folks that are being impacted by those days? Because I know a lot of the folks don't work a 9 to 5 that use those services. So I was curious if we did any kind of like flow impact when we looked at that, and just making sure those folks that really, really need those are have the least amount of impact.
Are you good with that being a follow-up too?
Absolutely.
Great, okay.
Yeah. Follow-ups are always great for me. Yeah, I know, I appreciate it. And then, again, just thinking about savings, as we, technology and those kind of systems are expanding, how much are we looking at utilizing more, AI and things like that to help, lighten those staff burdens, really get more services expanded? Are we looking at that to kind of increase with little dollars? Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the incredible amount of work that went into this incredibly difficult budget. I share the reactions I've been hearing around the table of how painful the prospect of all these cuts is to our community. And I just want to make sure we're not in any way conflating that to the work and effort and intent that went into the very careful crafting of it. This was very well presented, and it's very hard. I'm not really even prepared to start drilling into specifics right now of which parts bother me the most, because there is so much that's hitting me in my heart. We have time for those conversations in our coming meetings, but I'm just thankful that we have this team here to do the work on this, and I think we'll be digging into a lot. I will probably have some email questions for follow-up, and I want to use this as an opportunity to remind everyone that we don't have to come up with our questions in this moment. Please, as they come up, we can reach out to staff. We can, in particular, email Christina. the questions that come in later. The two members that aren't in the room are participating tonight. They both let us know well in advance they were unable to attend. They're watching online in a non-communicative form, and we'll be emailing their questions in too. So we do have our full body working on this, and I'm just really pleased you're all here. So I think that's all I have for the moment. Councilor Evans?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll take my round two now.
If you, if I may, can I recognize the mayor and then move into rounds two?
Go for it.
Thank you. Mayor Knutson, if you want to share any thoughts with us?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just echo the appreciations for all of the incredibly hard work that's gone into putting together this slide deck and information. I think so much of what has been shared this evening is such valuable information in us better understanding the problem that we're trying to solve, and I think also the community at large really benefit from access to this information, so thank you for making this so available. I have a couple of probably quick questions, starting with City Manager, the overview of organizational assessments that you mentioned on slide 46, that fire and EMS, financial governance assessments completed, all response assessments completed, but that there's the library, recreation, and cultural services and core business work looking at benchmarking efficiencies yet to come. That's on top of $91 million in total cuts and reductions from 2010 to 2027 projected. I'm just curious, also given that those areas are, I think in total, get to about 34% of the general fund combined total between those two. What's the timeline for outcomes from that assessment process or those two?
So we're working with those consultants right now, as you mentioned, and they're kind of going through what we call the current state assessment, and then they're going to start working on future state, like where are we now, where do they think we need to be, what are the opportunities for efficiencies, or where actually are we under-resourced. That's part of what they're going to give us. We expect to get those results in the early fall, so likely September.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for that proactive work. Not at all surprising, but very much appreciated. A quick question about expenses and the delicately put observation that we're facing many areas of uncertainty as a community, and also a really challenging situation with both inflation and any shifts in PERS that are quite outsized relative to what we're generating in terms of new property tax with development locally. Given that there are the incentive funds, the PERS incentive funds, and the strategy of paying some funding into that to essentially save more money later, and also the fact that other new legislation at the state level is increasing PERS costs that our city will pay. I'm just curious if there's any conversation at the state level similar to discussions like Measure 5 and Measure 50 task forces to think about how those incentive fund benefits can help cities with these increasing costs that are coming from state legislation and that really wildly influence our stability.
Thank you, Mayor. I would say that the EIF program was created to do that, to create an avenue for local and public jurisdictions to set aside dollars to decrease their future costs. I know there is a lot of conversation at the PERS board and then also in some legislative committees where cities are explaining the impacts of these legislative decisions on public entities as we look to the future. I'm not aware of a large-scale effort to take a fresh look at the PERS system. Again, you know, as the courts have ruled, we can't really go back and retroactively change anything. There are already promises made to employees in the past. It would really be looking at changing the system as we look to the future. And so to my knowledge, there isn't a current conversation about that.
Yeah, and thank you. And just to be clear, I didn't mean retroactively looking back and shifting those agreements. I think that feedback has been very clear and is based on a lot of contract law. But just how it is that we are engaging as something as significant as those adjustments in PERS really are a very large portion of the gaps that we're trying to close in our budget. So an observation and a question and something that follow up on. Lastly, I'll just offer that in keeping with a few other comments that I think I very much appreciate the staff's work to respond to the changing conditions and contract with Whitebird and the CAHOOTS program, and to adapt to that changing condition quickly and help it find some stability. I do think that the ongoing community conversation about the remaining gap in services that we may find that are part of meeting our community's needs, that having the time to collect that information and then having the capacity within our budget to be able to bring resource to that need is really important looking into these next couple of years. So really difficult right now because we don't have an immediately actionable partner in that work. It's fantastic that Lane County Mobile Crisis will be standing up to 24/7 services by June 1st. It's great news for our community's needs. And also, there's likely to be some other gap that's not a qualified mental health professional with an EMT, but is more street outreach or navigation-based. And I hope our budget will account for us to be able to look at that.
Thank you. May I see a show of hands of who wants a second round so I can do mental math? Okay, I think we can squeeze in the three of you if we keep it to about a minute each. Councilor Evans?
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep this to a minute. So, questions that have come up for me. Where are we at specifically with user fees around pools and other facilities that we have? What I didn't see in the presentation, and by the way, thank you for the presentation. It's one of the most comprehensive and complete presentations that I've seen in the 13 or 14 years I've been around here. But where are we with user fees? Particularly, I go back to when we were redoing Echo Hollow Pool, and I got a lot of heat from swim teams about not being able to use those services while the pool was being redone and the infrastructure was being rebuilt. Are we looking to charge some of those external users higher fees or higher rates to help offset some of this?
Yeah, so user fees are set administratively, and we adjust them almost every year. So part of what we're looking at right now as part of this Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services study is looking at our rates as we benchmark around to see where we're at. There's only so much you can do before you just lose people altogether, but yes.
Second question, and I think that Matt or Rich can probably address this. So I've had calls recently from outside city contractors that have been working on ongoing projects about the status of where we are with proceeding with some of those contracts, if we can proceed with some of the contracts, because of some of the federal cutbacks that are currently occurring in real time. So do we have an idea of what those effects are, or that's something that we need to look to answer at the next meeting?
Thank you, Counselor. I will say that that's all changing every day for us. We're getting different guidance from departments on what funding may be affected or what contractual requirements they may be wanting to add to contracts. We're going to have a work session, I think, in June.
Yeah, we had to move it, so it says city manager update. This is the focus of it.
And it will be a focus on federal funding and effects that we're seeing from that.
Real quickly, can you explain the difference between service delivery at the First Avenue Animal Shelter and Green Hill?
I'm going to let our Central Services Director, Mia Carriaga, answer that.
And I'll try and be brief because it can be fairly simple. First Avenue is the location of our spay and neuter clinic. So that is a facility that we co-own with Springfield and Lane County, but we run city services out of that. Green Hill used to lease a portion of it. They moved out, and are solely located at the Green Hill location on Green Hill. And so we run the spay neuter clinic out of that location. We don't house or home animals.
And we're looking to merge some of those services in with Green Hill, or all of them?
We are not.
Not,
No.
okay. All right. And then I think the last question that I have relates back to police. And Chief, you might want to be able to respond to this. So I know that statistically, we're making a dent in property crimes. We've been trying to address some of the criminal trespass issues that we've had. And we have the parking meter bandits out there that are stealing parking meters off of the deal and trying to, you know, get as much change out of them as possible. My question is about what I'm hearing anecdotally from residents and businesses about their frustrations with not seeing at this point the results they're expecting out of the investments that we have made in police to address a large number of these property crime issues and other crime issues that are popping up and occurring. I say anecdotally because people call me, send me emails, and, you know, both you and I have talked about how police is addressing those concerns that residents and businesses have.
And if I may interject, we are again at time. I'm going to ask the chief if is this something that we would be able to get as a response in our pending packet?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'm going to recognize Vice Chair Konofsky so that we can attempt to finish our second round and still get to the wrap-up that we need to do.
Mr. Chair, I move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes.
I think Siobhan got the second on that. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you. With that, I will.
Well, I mean, you're gonna let me have my last question?
You called the last one the last question.
I know. Well, I didn't quite finish, but that's okay. I can come back with the next meeting. That's fine. We'll do it.
Thank you, Counselor. Siobhan?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. I'll send all my other questions later, but as I sit here and look at the largest cuts in FTE with the 9 out of library and 2 out of the Office of Equity, it's glaringly clear that it's more than any other department. And I just think about how these areas directly increase equitable access to our community. So I'm curious if anything like these positions could be combined. I noticed I see like lots of vacant management analysts or senior program coordinator position in the different, can the city maybe have just 2 of those to serve all the different, I don't know. I'm just trying to think if there's any way to save some of those positions, because even though it's only like 13, each one of those people probably touches hundreds of people in our community. So that's my question. Can they be combined? And if so, how would that work? But it doesn't have to be answered right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Keating?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, with apologies if my earlier observation came out clunky and offensive. I'll try reframing it as less feeling like Elon Musk with a chainsaw at a municipal level. Perhaps it's more Elon Musk with a tree trimmer at a municipal level. Feels, city manager, feels. I'm in a mood. Green Hill Humane Society, our last budget session. We worked to, as I understand it, move dollars from the CSI to cover 911 operators, which then freed up general fund money to supplement the cost associated with Green Hill Humane Society. What's changed? Why can we not use that same strategy this upcoming biennium?
The strategies last biennium with this community safety payroll tax were intended to be one time. The community safety payroll tax is also a fund that is experiencing, I wouldn't say distress, but as we look at increased costs and a capped revenue source, we're very careful about what we add as an ongoing basis to the CSPT. So of the one-time expenditures that were added, they were intended and voted on at the Budget Committee to be one-time in nature. We did, as the city manager discussed earlier, when we looked at the 11.5, we were adding that back as one of those ongoing kind of cyclical adds back that wouldn't be one time but would be ongoing. But with the situation we're in right now where we have, with no new revenue, we have revisited all of those decisions, and that's why it's kind of come off the list as an ongoing ad.
Thank you. I would posit it's unacceptable.
Thank you. That concludes Budget Committee discussion for tonight. Minutes from the February 12th meeting were sent out. Did anyone have any recommended changes or comments?
Second.
I heard a motion to approve from Councilor Clark, seconded by Councilor Evans. All in favor? Thank you. Were any opposed? Thank you. And that brings us to wrap up. So first, I just want to talk about what's coming up in the schedule. This was on page 2 of your agenda packet. We have upcoming meetings on May 14th, 21st, and 28th. On the 14th, we'll be holding an in-person public comment, and there will be staff presentations that we've already talked about. We're going to be hearing about alternative response, about financial conditions, and details there. We have not yet determined those presentations for the 21st, and that will be driven by what we've heard in the room. So what seems to be the most pressing issues and concerns, and we're going to continue listening to the direction that deliberations and conversation go to drive that process. So if there is something that you weren't able to bring up verbally tonight, please get an email in saying that this is a topic of importance to you, so that we know that and can keep that in mind as I work with staff and my vice chair on figuring out exactly the best use of our time in those meetings. And any additional questions that we have, any of those detail pieces, please route all of those through Christina so that we can keep that coordinated and in one particular document. So that's just where we are process-wise. And the last thing I want to say, it goes to the time extensions we went with tonight, is with this budget process, more than I think anyone I've been involved in my 7 years on this committee, this is so much more difficult and so much more complex than a lot of what we've had to face in the past. It's very important to me as chair that we have the opportunity to be as thorough and comprehensive in our efforts as possible. And it is only with the will of the body, but I would hope that we are going to be able to, as needed, put extra time in. We are going to be using the city council's public comment structure with the full 90 minutes available, which is more than we've historically offered, because we have expectations that the community might have a lot to say on this. And as much as possible, I plan to be here as long as it takes, and as long as you are willing to continue extending meetings as needed to get us to where we need to go. I want this to be as deliberative as it can be, and I hope that the rest of you are comfortable working in that same approach. So with that, this meeting is adjourned at 7:53 p.m. Thank you, everyone.